Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Thank you for joining us. It's been a while since we've checked in with our congressman in Fall River, 4th District Congressman Jake Auchincloss, who joins us now. Today he's in Washington, D.C. Congressman, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
It's always good to be with you.
So let me ask you. I think we spoke just prior to Election Day. At that time, we were unsure what the makeup of the House would be. Now that we do know that the Republicans are now have a slight majority in the House, how have things been the first month or so in Washington under, I guess, different leadership?
Well, the House Republicans had a fork in the road when they took back a narrow majority. They could have built on the bipartisan successes of last Congress when we invested in infrastructure and science and domestic manufacturing and had the strongest job growth track record in history, when we passed climate action and clean energy investments, and when we restored America's standing on the world stage with our support for Ukraine and with our actions relative to China. Unfortunately, the first actions out of the gate for the Republicans under Speaker McCarthy have been to raise the federal deficit in helping the wealthy and the well-connected evade taxes and in holding hostage the full faith and credit of the United States without being able to present a coherent plan in response. It's a rocky start that suggests that House Republicans don't have a grown-up who can come to the negotiating table and work with President Biden and with House Democrats on actually governing.
Yeah, how has it been in terms of, and I want to talk about your committees because there's one new committee, that a special committee that you're going to be serving on this term. But is it still a slow process of getting back up to a new term? 2 years ago was your first term in Congress. Are things moving a little more at a more regular pace in terms of your work on Capitol Hill?
I'm not sure it was ever slow or even regular. It feels like I'm aging in dog years in Washington. We have a lot on our plate. I am looking at infrastructure and water issues, which I know are critical to Fall River in particular. I work closely with Representative Fiola and Senator Rodericks and, of course, Mayor Coogan on waterfront development in Fall River, where we've been able to secure federal funding on public safety grants, on CSO and other water-related issues. So there is the continued delivering of results in regards to infrastructure. And then there are new and emerging issues that every new Congress brings to the fold. So I'm focused on clean energy independence. I'm focusing on lowering healthcare costs. I'm focusing on helping us craft a coherent long-term strategy for China that rises above partisan politics.
Yeah, let's talk about that special committee that you've been appointed to by Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, dealing with China. What attributes do you think you bring to the table that will help work in that committee?
As a veteran, as a millennial, I offer a pretty rare perspective in Congress because we are facing a generational opportunity to craft really thoughtful, far-sighted policy in regards to our competition with the Chinese Communist Party. This competition, first and foremost, needs to be based on America's long-standing strengths: freedom, democracy, science, the heritage that has always made us strong, and that if we reinvest in, will continue to make us the world's richest and most powerful nation. If we allow this heritage to wither, then no strategy, no committee can possibly save us. But if we reinvigorate it, then I'm so optimistic about the 21st century. We also need to have a sophisticated and nuanced approach to a nation of 1.4 billion people. Some of my Republican colleagues slam the table and talk about a new Cold War. That's a pretty lazy framework for thinking about a relationship with an economy that's 10 times bigger and 10 times more integrated than the Soviet Union ever was. There are areas where we need to prepare for conflict, Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. There are areas where we want to compete, particularly in regards to R&D and to investment in the global South. And then there's areas where we actually need to collaborate, particularly on climate change and on public health, where those are really transnational threats that the two biggest nations in the world need to be working on.
Yeah. Now, will this select committee be working with others in the House? You just talked about some, defense issues, economic issues, climate change issues. Will they be working with other committees within the House to craft legislation moving forward when it comes to, working with China?
The committee will be issuing recommendations,
Okay.
which will then manifest as legislation or as executive initiatives. A committee of this nature does not have direct jurisdiction or oversight capabilities. What it has is a platform, and when it disseminates its recommendations, those recommendations find their way into policy in a multitude of different formats. So it's going to be at the nexus of a lot of Washington action.
Yeah. How has your relationship been with the new minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries?
I've been a strong and early supporter of Hakeem's bid to be the leader of the Democratic caucus in the House. He is somebody who has put boots on the ground throughout the districts of the House Democratic caucus in this country. He knows what voters are saying. He knows what members need to deliver for their districts. He's got the confidence of members young and old. And we are, as you saw in the first week of this Congress with the 15 rounds of voting, united and energized behind his leadership. Now, what we got to do is get 5 more in 2024 and make him the speaker.
Yeah. The other committee that you serve on, you mentioned it, touched upon a little bit, is Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that you were very comfortable with 2 years ago. A lot of the subcommittees that deal with a lot of the issues in the South Coast, Coast Guard and Maritime, transportation, of course, highways and transit, as well as railroads, pipelines, a lot of issues that impact the South Coast, but particularly Fall River. So how important is that going to be in terms of bringing things back to our region?
Critical, and I can give you 3 examples right off the bat. One is the transportation infrastructure to support waterfront development in Fall River. I've been able to direct some congressional spending to waterfront development, and I'll continue to work on that in conjunction with state and local officials. But we also need to make sure that South Coast Rail is supported and that the Route 79 project is supported. Those are both transportation issues, and I'm here to be a federal partner in them. Second is in regards to water. I had mentioned this at the top of our conversation. Fall River has challenges with CSO. It has challenges with subsurface infrastructure in regards to water. And I've worked with the mayor and with the state delegation to continue to be a partner in upgrading Fall River's water infrastructure. And then third is offshore wind, which you mentioned. I have been tracking closely a number of offshore wind initiatives, have engaged on offshore wind at the federal level and in conjunction with Bristol Community College, with the National Offshore Wind Institute, with Brayton Point in Somerset, with developers, and of course with Fall River officials to ensure that to the extent that we're able to build an ecosystem around offshore wind in the South Coast, which I think we can and should drive towards, that Fall River is a beneficiary of those jobs and that economic development.
Yeah. As we continue on, again, with your second term, there's some things you learned the first 2 years that you're taking with you. In terms of general legislation coming up for the term, is there anything particular you're excited about?
I'm excited on legislation that I'm working on to lower healthcare costs, and more on that to come. I'm excited on legislation regarding offshore wind, which I think can help advance the industry. And then I'm excited about some work I'm doing back at home in Massachusetts, where it's not federal policy making, but it's convening to drive towards action that is to the benefit of Massachusetts economy. And I've been, speaking and working with the Healy administration on a couple of different endeavors. So I've got engagements across the board, and it keeps me busy, but it certainly keeps me energized.
Yeah. As we are recording this, it is February 7th. This evening, you'll be attending the State of the Union address by President Joe Biden. Some people are saying that it's his attempt to sort of launch his reelection bid in 2024. What role do you see the president playing over the next term now that, the Congress is split with the Republicans in charge of the House while the Democrats still holding the Senate?
Just continuing to be a statesman, to be a grown-up in the room at a time when the GOP is devolving into a chaos caucus that can't put together their own priorities, their own leadership structure internally, much less try to, present an agenda to the American people. We saw this in real time with the incident with the Chinese surveillance balloon over the weekend. The president, as commander in chief, really accomplished all three of his objectives. He upheld the sovereignty of American airspace by shooting it down. He maximized counterintelligence capabilities by tracking and jamming it and then recovering the assets. And then he protected life and property by choosing to shoot it down at a time when it wasn't going to inflict damage. This was another foreign policy victory for Joe Biden. He's had a series of domestic policy victories in his first 2 years, from infrastructure to climate action to science to bipartisan gun safety reform. And we're going to build on that in the next 2 years. Now, it'd be easier if the GOP would get their house in order and actually come to us with real sensible policy proposals. But regardless, Joe Biden is going to govern in the best interest of the American people and is going to ensure that we're going to continue to deliver the fruits of a lot of the policies that were enacted last term.
You know, one of the issues that the Republicans have talked about and could impact the economy of the United States is the United States needs to raise the debt ceiling, and the Republicans have been reluctant to go along with that without some concessions on the spending side. Do you feel that there'll be some resolution in the next, short term to make this happen so the government can continue to function, one, and two, doesn't result in any specific hurtful cuts? And what comes to mind, of course, is Social Security and Medicare.
House Democrats and the president have been clear that we are not going to endanger Social Security or Medicare, that we are committed to their long-term solvency for this generation and for generations to come. It's got to be an ironclad commitment to our constituents. And I am confident that we are going to be able to resolve this debt limit situation, but it is frustrating that we are even in this situation to begin with. And just to be clear, the debt limit is not the measure that determines how much we spend or how much we raise. That's the appropriations process. That's the taxing process. That's a separate debate. That is a debate where, of course, everyone is welcome to come to the table with their ideas on a budget. But that's not this debate. This debate is about whether the United States pays its bills on time. We have always paid our bills on time. It's what underscores the full faith and credit of the United States, and is what really keeps capital markets working so that Americans' retirement accounts, whether it's 401ks or pensions, are able to grow and secure a nest egg for people who are thinking about retiring. What the House GOP has done right now is they have taken hostage the debt limit. They have threatened Americans' retirement accounts. And yet they have been inarticulate, if not totally incoherent, about what they actually want in return. Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, has been saying, well, we want to save a couple $100 billion, but don't want to touch defense spending, Social Security, Medicare, don't want to raise taxes. So mathematically, that means that he wants to zero out every single federal program that is not entitlement spending. That means housing for our veterans. That means training for pediatric physicians. That means programs to ensure water potability and improving public safety equipment. All of that zeroed out. It's a nonsensical proposal coming from somebody who's meant to be at the negotiating table. So it's frustrating, and it's frankly a little embarrassing that we're in this position right now.
Yeah. Let me ask you finally, the war in Ukraine is going to be celebrating 1 year anniversary later on this month. There have been many out there that feel that the time has come for the United States to either get more involved or maybe step back a little bit. Do you think that the United States should still be as actively engaged in it as it has been, in terms of providing not only logistical and military know-how, but also supplies as well?
For as long as it takes. And it's important to underscore why this is so important. First, it's important because the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives and their livelihoods against an unjust and unprovoked invasion, and their bravery should be met with our support. Number two, the United States needs to lead the world in upholding the post-war rules-based order that we helped architect after the successful conclusion of World War II. This is about sending a message to the authoritarian regime in Moscow and Beijing and Tehran and Pyongyang that the United States is going to stand with freedom and democracy when they are under assault. And strength is the best way to ensure peace. Appeasement only invites more aggression. And then third, this is actually an incredible ROI on national security dollars. And just to put some more flesh on those bones, for about $100 billion, which is 12-15% of our annual defense spending, We have cratered a third to a half of Russia's conventional military capacity. We are on track to double its border with NATO. We have induced more defense spending from Germany, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia. We have unlocked tremendous strength amongst our various alliances for a small fraction of what we spend every year on our own defense. This is a good return on investment.
All right. Congressman Jake Auchincloss, I appreciate your time as always, and we'll catch up again soon. Hopefully in the district next time you're in Fall River. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you.